A teenage girl stood alone in the courtroom, forced to defend herself without a lawyer. When she finally stated her full name, the judge's face turned ghostly white. What powerful secrets does her family name hold that could shake the foundations of the justice system? Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get started. They say justice is blind, but sometimes a single name can tear away the blindfold in the flash of a gavel. That was the day a 17-year-old girl named Lexi Knight walked into Courthouse 14, prepared to defend herself against charges that threatened to define her future. People whispered that no teen had ever insisted on representing themselves in front of the formidable Judge Marshall. But rumors alone could never capture the tension twisting the air that morning, or the hush that fell when Lexi uttered one final statement that left the judge pale and trembling. The story had begun weeks earlier, when Lexi found herself facing criminal charges after standing up to what she believed was an unjust school policy. Her refusal to comply with a mandatory mental health screening, rumored to be a thinly veiled data collection scheme, had escalated into a physical confrontation with a security guard. Officially, the guard claimed Lexi assaulted him. Lexi insisted she had only defended herself after he grabbed her roughly by the arm, ignoring her repeated pleas to let her leave. Most students would have accepted a plea bargain. Most would have allowed a public defender to speak on their behalf. Lexi Knight was not like most students. That morning, as she walked up the courthouse steps, she noticed the stares. A teenage girl in a neat secondhand suit, her hair pulled into a ponytail that revealed the bruise on her temple, a leftover from the scuffle. Her mother's old briefcase hung from her hand, stuffed with every piece of research she had compiled. She had no illusions about how daunting it would be to face an experienced prosecutor alone. But she refused to back down. There was no money for a private attorney, and Lexi did not trust the system enough to rely on a court-appointed defense. Inside the courthouse, the hallway bustled with lawyers in crisp suits, officers in uniform, and anxious citizens waiting for their cases to be called. Lexi drew in a calming breath, recalling her father's words from years past. "You have to stand for your beliefs, even if your voice shakes." She had not uttered her father's name in a long time. After his suspicious disappearance, no one in town wanted to talk about him, but the name lingered in her mind like a silent vow. Every time Lexi thought of giving up, she remembered who she came from. Courtroom 14 loomed before her. She felt small pushing open the heavy double doors, yet her eyes remained fixed on the bench where Judge Marshall presided. A hush settled as she stepped to the defense table, glancing across to see the state's attorney, Monica Reed, a sharp-eyed prosecutor known for her relentless pursuit of convictions. Rumor said Reed's record was nearly spotless. The possibility that a teenage girl might hamper that statistic was laughable to most in attendance. Bailiffs called for order, and the judge took his seat. Silver-haired, with an austere expression that seldom cracked, Judge Marshall was notorious for imposing harsh sentences on defendants he believed to be disrespectful or manipulative. Lexi bowed her head politely, feeling her stomach flutter. The minute the judge's gaze touched her, she sensed a flicker of curiosity, as though he recognized something about her face, but he kept his questions to himself. The proceeding began with formality. Lexi respectfully declared her intention to represent herself. Judge Marshall raised a brow, clearly suspicious. "You understand the risk you're taking by not securing legal counsel?" he asked, his voice reverberating through the silent room. Lexi nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. This is my choice." Prosecutor Reed wasted no time painting Lexi as a disruptive student whose defiance escalated into violence. She cited witness statements from teachers claiming Lexi had a history of challenging authority. The security guard, who sat in the gallery with an arm sling for dramatic effect, testified that Lexi attacked him in the hallway. Reed displayed photos of scratches on his arms, ignoring the bruises on Lexi's own body. Lexi stood calmly, fists clenched at her sides. She pointed out the security footage the prosecutor had neglected to mention. She told the court how she repeatedly asked to go home after refusing the questionable screening. Her voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. She recounted how the security guard blocked her path, how he grabbed her arm, and how she only wrenched free to protect herself. Then she presented a page from the school's own regulations. The policy that was mandated was not yet legally enforceable, lacking a signed directive from the district. She insisted she was being punished for refusing to be a silent participant in an unauthorized program. During each statement, Lexi noticed the judge's expression flicker. At first, he watched with a hint of condescension, as though doubting her competence. But as she pressed forward, detailing every lawful reason for her refusal, something in his gaze shifted to admiration. Or was it alarm? When recess was called, Lexi stepped outside for air. That was when an older man approached her. She recognized him from the local news. He was a civil rights advocate named Victor James. "You're fighting alone in there," he said softly. "But you don't have to. I can help. Your father—" He broke off, studying her face. "Your father was a good man. He once helped me keep my own daughter from being wrongfully expelled. I never forgot." Lexi froze, her mind swirling. She had always suspected her father was no mere small-town troublemaker. He used to talk about injustices he wanted to expose. Her mother rarely spoke of him after he vanished, the heartbreak too raw. But now hearing a stranger mention him jolted something in her heart. "How do you know my father?" she managed. Victor glanced around, as if worried someone might overhear. "Let's just say he angered powerful people by uncovering corruption in local government. He found evidence linking certain officials to secret deals that harmed the community's most vulnerable. Then he vanished." Victor's eyes softened. "You carry that same spark in you. Be careful. Those officials still have influence." Before Lexi could ask more, the bailiff announced the session was resuming. She hurried back, heart pounding. The second half of the day turned into a duel of words. Prosecutor Reed tried discrediting Lexi's evidence. She cast doubt on the authenticity of the policy documents. Lexi countered with more thorough records, referencing the district's official site. She cited testimony from a teacher who had quietly supported her. Tension climbed with every exchange, like a tightrope trembling under their words. At last, the judge demanded quiet. "Miss Knight," he said, "do you have anything further to say on your own behalf?" Lexi took one deep breath. She reached into her battered briefcase, extracting a piece of paper. It was an old newspaper clipping featuring her father. He stood in front of the same courthouse, defiantly calling out local corruption. She locked eyes with the judge. "I want to say that the system is meant to serve truth and justice, not intimidation. I'm here because I chose not to be silenced, and I know what it cost my father." She held up the clipping, her voice unwavering. "My name is Lexi Knight, daughter of Daniel Knight, the man who once testified in this very room against corruption in our city government." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The judge's face went ashen, as though he had seen a ghost. Prosecutor Reed looked at him sharply, confusion flickering in her eyes. Judge Marshall's expression had gone rigid, sweat beading on his brow. For a moment, no one spoke. Lexi felt her pulse thunder. She didn't fully grasp what was happening, but she saw fear in the judge's eyes, fear and something like guilt. He cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "Daniel Knight. Was your father?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, "and he disappeared after defending another innocent man in this courthouse. Nobody ever found him." The judge said nothing, but his hand trembled as he gripped the gavel. The crowd watched in stunned silence. In that charged stillness, Lexi Knight understood that her father's crusade had left shadows in this courtroom. She could practically feel the weight of unspoken secrets pressing down on them. The entire building seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the judge to speak. She had come here expecting to fight alone for her rights, but now she sensed there was a larger reckoning at play, one that might cast light on her father's fate. Without waiting for the judge's response, Lexi finished, "I'm not asking for favors. I'm asking for justice, the same justice my father believed in, the same that's spelled out in our laws. No more, no less." Judge Marshall swallowed hard, words failing him. Then his voice shook as he adjourned for the day, leaving gaping mouths in his wake. Lexi watched him retreat, stunned by how quickly the color had drained from his face the moment he learned her last name. Something big was about to unravel, and her father's name was the key. Lexi spent the rest of that day in a stunned haze, replaying the moment Judge Marshall turned pale at the mention of Daniel Knight. After court was adjourned, she drifted into the corridor, where a crowd of onlookers parted to let her through. There, by a marbled column, she spotted a familiar face. Her mother, Allison Knight, who had hurried in just in time to see the judge's reaction. Lexi opened her mouth to speak, but her mother placed a trembling hand on her shoulder, eyes brimming with questions she was afraid to voice in front of strangers. Prosecutor Reed brushed past with a curt nod, folders clasped tightly against her chest. Lexi felt a prickle of unease as she caught the flicker of uncertainty in Reed's eyes, like the prosecutor was trying to piece together something bigger than a simple assault case. Reed paused as though to say something, then thought better of it. She turned and disappeared into the judge's chambers, leaving Lexi alone with her mother. The courthouse corridor emptied around them, echoes of footsteps fading into hush. "Mom," Lexi said finally, her voice low. "They know who Dad is." Allison's face tightened. "I never wanted it to come out this way, not in front of the whole courtroom. But maybe it's time the truth saw daylight." Lexi's heart thumped. The truth. She had grown up with scraps of rumor about her father, hush money bribes he refused to accept, men in suits telling him to drop his evidence. Then one night he left and never returned. Some said he was dead. Others hinted he was alive but in hiding. Allison refused to speak in detail, apparently fearing for Lexi's safety. Yet those old stories never died, and Lexi never stopped wondering. They found a bench near the tall windows facing the parking lot. Allison reached for Lexi's hand, her voice unsteady. "Your father's last case involved strong allegations against local officials, some of them high up. I think that judge was part of the hearing. Back then, your dad testified that people in the courthouse were complicit in covering up dirty deals. Then, out of nowhere, the judge who seemed sympathetic changed his tone. The whole matter was dismissed on a technicality. After that, your dad got threatening calls. He told me if anything happened, I had to protect you. So I stayed quiet." She squeezed Lexi's fingers. "I'm sorry it's all hitting you now." Lexi tried to process it all. The memory of how the judge's knuckles whitened around his gavel kept intruding on her thoughts. Something about Daniel Knight's name had rattled him to the core. She looked at her mother. If there's any way Dad's still alive, Allison's expression was pained. "I never gave up hope, but it's been almost 4 years. I just don't know, Lex." They exited the courthouse through a side door, trying to avoid the few reporters who'd caught wind of a teen representing herself in a criminal hearing. No major outlets had appeared yet, but Lexi could sense that whispers about the name Knight might soon reach the local press. By the time they got home, her mother was trembling with leftover nerves. Their modest house stood near the outskirts of town, a single-story structure with peeling shutters and a small porch Daniel had built before Lexi was born. Inside, Allison sank onto the couch, rummaging for something in her purse. She withdrew a weathered envelope and passed it to Lexi. "Your dad wrote this just before he disappeared. It's the only piece of his that never got taken when men searched our home. I never opened it because I was scared of what it might say." Lexi's pulse quickened. She slipped a finger under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper filled with Daniel's handwriting. "To my girls. If you're reading this, I might already be gone. Please know I did everything I could to stand for truth. I've discovered a ring of corruption involving judges, officials, and businessmen who profit by manipulating public funds. My testimony is scheduled for next week. If something prevents me from appearing, I beg you to keep searching for answers. They will try to smear my name, threaten you, or bury this. But trust that someone brave enough can bring it all out into the open. And remember, I love you. Always." Tears splashed onto the paper as Lexi read. She glanced at her mother, whose hand was clasped over her mouth in grief. "He wanted us to push forward," Lexi whispered. "He wanted us to fight. I can't just plead out now. I have to keep going." Allison nodded. "I know." The next morning, Lexi arrived at school, uncertain how many had heard about the courthouse spectacle. Whispers followed her through the halls, but she kept her chin high. In homeroom, her friend Caleb leaned over. "You represented yourself yesterday, right? People are saying you destroyed that security guard's story. Also heard the judge acted weird when you said your dad's name. What's that about?" She glanced around to ensure no eavesdroppers, then mumbled, "I'm not completely sure, but I think my dad's disappearance was tied to something big." Caleb's eyes widened. "Lex, be careful. You don't mess with folks in power unless you're ready for consequences." "I'm already facing consequences," she muttered, pointing to the bruise on her arm. "Besides, what good is fear if it just keeps us quiet?" Her teachers mostly avoided her gaze. She guessed the administration had instructed them to leave her alone and let the legal process run its course. Only Ms. Duval, her history teacher, gave her a faint smile in the hallway. "I heard you stood up for yourself," the teacher whispered. "Remember, the great changes in history often started with a single voice." Lexi wanted to thank her, but Ms. Duval hurried off. That afternoon, a phone call came. The clerk had scheduled a second hearing in 2 days. Lexi's mind whirred. She had precious little time to organize her father's notes, the partial list of suspicious deals, her own arguments about the alleged assault. The fear was real, but so was her resolve. Meanwhile, Judge Marshall sat alone in his private chambers, the door locked. A half-empty coffee mug trembled in his hand. On his desk lay an old photograph showing Daniel Knight in the hallway of this very courthouse. Across from him in that photo was a younger version of Marshall, lips pressed in a taut line. He remembered that day vividly, the first time Daniel tried to blow the whistle. He remembered how certain colleagues told him to ignore Knight's claims or face losing everything. And he recalled the hush money that, in a moment of weakness, he had accepted to provide an excuse to dismiss Daniel's testimony, an excuse that sealed Daniel's doom. When Lexi spoke her father's name, the judge's blood ran cold. All these years later, nightmares still tormented him, but he had chosen to remain silent. Now the man's teenage daughter stood on the cusp of exposing him, or at least forcing him to revisit secrets he thought he had buried. Guilt gnawed at him. He wondered what would happen if Lexi discovered the full extent of his complicity in Daniel Knight's downfall. In a snap of anger at his own cowardice, he hurled the coffee mug against the wall, liquid splattering across old case files. Then he slumped forward, head in his hands. He had children of his own, grown now, living far away, and the thought of them facing a fraction of Lexi's ordeal sickened him. For a fleeting moment, he contemplated doing the right thing, coming clean. letting the corruption unravel in open court. But the thought of powerful men behind the scenes, men who had arranged Daniel's disappearance, paralyzed him once more. Back at home, Lexi scoured her father's battered notebooks, desperate for anything that might link to her current predicament. She found half-legible references to bribes, land zoning manipulations, and even hush payments tied to juvenile court deals. A single name jumped out repeatedly: B. Carroll. She searched online but found only vague references, some corporate entity with government ties. The next morning, Victor James, the civil rights advocate, knocked on her door. Allison let him in warily. "I'm here as a friend," he said. "Daniel Knight saved me once, and I owe him. I started digging into those old leads. I've got a feeling the same people who silenced him are still lurking." Lexi led him to the dining table, where she spread out her father's notes. She explained about B. Carroll, the missing hearing, everything. Victor grimaced. Carroll was a major campaign donor for multiple judges. I'd wager he threatened or paid off folks to keep Daniel's evidence off the record, but we need proof. "Then let's find it," Lexi said, an edge of determination in her voice. "I'll use whatever I can in court." Victor nodded, though concern clouded his face. He warned her, "Carroll and his associates won't sit idle while you drag old skeletons into the light. Be prepared." 2 days later, Lexi walked into courtroom 14 again, armed not just with documents about her assault case, but also the evidence she'd pieced together about corruption. Judge Marshall looked even paler this time, shadows under his eyes as though he hadn't slept. Monica Reed shot Lexi a tense glance. The audience hushed as the hearing commenced. Lexi introduced a motion. She intended to argue self-defense not only based on the invalid policy, but also on possible deeper motives behind the security guard's aggression. Reed objected vehemently, labeling it a desperate attempt to muddy the waters. But Lexi pressed on, summoning every ounce of courage. "I have reason to believe," she declared, "that my father, Daniel Knight, was targeted for exposing official misconduct, and that my own arrest is an extension of intimidation tactics." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge raised his gavel, ready to demand order, but froze when Lexi locked eyes with him. In that electric instant, she saw sweat bead on his brow. He set the gavel down without striking it. At the prosecution table, Reed glowered, uncertain how to proceed. This was no ordinary assault case anymore. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Lexi added quietly, "I stand here to defend myself against false charges, just like my father stood here to defend our community before he vanished. I ask this court to weigh my words carefully." Judge Marshall's hand shook. Slowly, he leaned forward. "Miss Knight, proceed," he whispered. The collective hush in the courtroom drew tight as a wire, every eye fixed on Lexi. She felt a hollowness in the pit of her stomach but refused to show it. Judge Marshall's voice had wavered just enough for her to notice, a quiver of conscience from a man who might be silently warring with guilt. Prosecutor Reed's expression was equally telling, alternating between calculated confidence and something akin to dread. Whatever Reed had expected, it wasn't a 17-year-old standing at the defense table, referencing a mysterious disappearance and a ring of corruption. Clearing her throat, Lexi began by summarizing her key arguments. She knew she was risking an objection from the prosecution, but she pressed on with methodical calm. "Your Honor, the evidence will show I acted in self-defense when the security guard—" Here she gestured to the man glowering in the front row, his sling long since removed but replaced with a bandage he dramatically displayed, "used force to detain me for refusing an unauthorized screening. In a broader context, my father, Daniel Knight, once stood in this very courthouse presenting evidence of systemic corruption. He disappeared under suspicious circumstances. I have reason to believe the same forces that silenced him are exerting undue influence on my case." She inhaled, hearing murmurs around the gallery. This was a criminal assault hearing. No one expected talk of deep-seated conspiracies. But Lexi also saw recognition in a few faces, as if some in the audience remembered the Daniel Knight scandal. Perhaps they dismissed it as a rumor until now. Prosecutor Reed pounced the moment Lexi paused. "Objection, Your Honor. We are here to determine whether Miss Knight committed an assault, not to litigate unsubstantiated conspiracy theories. None of this has relevance to the charge." Judge Marshall's hand rose to quell the noise, but Lexi spoke up first. "Relevance can be established, Your Honor, because the events leading to my arrest were not isolated. There's a pattern of intimidation tied to incomplete or illegitimate policies. My father's own testimony revolved around government misconduct, including improper enforcement of regulations for personal gain. The parallels matter." A flicker crossed the judge's face, though he tried to mask it. "Miss Knight," he said quietly, "can you be more specific about these parallels?" The question hung in the air, and Lexi could almost sense Reed's rising panic. The prosecutor clearly did not want Lexi going further down that road. But Lexi had come too far to back down now. "Yes, Your Honor," she answered, producing a sheet of paper from her father's notebooks. "These are references to land deals and hush payments involving certain officials, some of them in close contact with the school board and local law enforcement. My father documented how these officials pressured local institutions to adopt policies that gave them access to private data. The policy requiring mandatory mental health screenings at my school bears striking similarities to the proposals he challenged. He accused them of seeking personal profit or influence from the data, and it's suspicious that I became a target for refusing to cooperate." Reed sprang to her feet, cheeks reddening. "Your Honor, again, none of this is relevant. The defendant is trying to turn a straightforward assault case into a baseless spectacle." Lexi felt her anger flare but kept her voice steady. "Maybe the policy itself isn't on trial, but it motivated the security guard's confrontation. He was told to detain me for refusing and he used unnecessary force. I had every right to protect myself." She willed the judge to let her finish. "Furthermore, if the larger environment surrounding my father's testimony is repeating itself, then my arrest could be an act of retaliation to keep me silent, just like they silenced him." Judge Marshall's gavel struck lightly, less of a rebuke and more of a reminder that he still presided. "One at a time. Miss Knight, are you asserting the school's security guard acted under instructions that tie into these broader claims of corruption?" "Precisely, Your Honor," Lexi confirmed. "He was following an order rooted in an illegal policy that may have connections to a bigger scheme." Seated in the front row, the guard looked like he might protest, but Reed shot him a warning glare. He swallowed, eyes shifting. Judge Marshall cleared his throat. "I'll allow some exploration of these motives, but keep it concise, Miss Knight. We still have an assault charge to evaluate." His tone, though tinged with reluctance, gave her permission to continue. Lexi forged ahead, heart pounding. She reviewed a timeline. How the district had abruptly mandated the screenings, how a private consulting firm with opaque funding seemed to have influenced the superintendent, how certain board members had ties to the same developers her father once implicated. She didn't have ironclad proof yet, but she had enough to raise eyebrows. When she finished, Reed let out a breath. "Your Honor, this is smoke and mirrors. My evidence is plain. The security guard has injuries, photos of Miss Knight physically resisting, and statements from faculty members describing her as disruptive. We ask the court to focus on the straightforward facts." Judge Marshall nodded, but his eyes lingered on Lexi. "Do you have any additional direct evidence concerning the guard's use of force?" Lexi nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." She called her first witness, a fellow student, a wide-eyed sophomore named Tiana, who had discreetly recorded the incident on her phone. Tiana recounted how she saw the guard grab Lexi's arm, twisting it behind her back, ignoring her pleas. Then came the short clip, displayed on a screen for all to see. The guard's grip was harsh, and Lexi's struggle appeared instinctive, more defensive than aggressive. The courtroom fell silent as the footage ended. Reed, flustered, tried to discredit Tiana's testimony, suggesting the clip lacked context. But Tiana stood firm. There was no threat from Lexi. She just kept asking to be let go so she could call her mom. He wouldn't let her. Judge Marshall studied the guard over the rim of his glasses. Anything to say about that? The guard sank into his seat, muttering about how Lexi threw a punch, but it was unconvincing. The punch looked more like a frantic lashing of her elbow, a reflex under duress. Reed's face tightened. The physical evidence of the phone clip undermined her strongest argument. The atmosphere changed after that. Audience members whispered, some leaning forward, while the guards slumped with a defeated scowl. Reed tried to salvage her case by calling an assistant principal who insisted Lexi had always been rebellious. But on cross-examination, Lexi coolly pointed out how the assistant principal was one of the main enforcers of the questionable screening policy and had a history of pushing it despite parental concerns. When the judge called for a recess, Lexi stepped outside, chest heaving with adrenaline. Her mother hurried up to her, eyes shining with cautious pride. "You're doing incredibly well," Allison said, hands on Lexi's shoulders. "But you need to be careful. You saw how upset that prosecutor looked." Before Lexi could reply, a familiar voice spoke from behind. Indeed, she should. She whirled around to see Victor James again, hat in hand. He offered a tight smile. "The more you expose, the more some people might panic. I recognized a face in the gallery, an associate of Carol. I think you're making waves." Lexi's pulse sped up. If Carol's people were observing, that meant the conspiracy her father unearthed truly lingered in the background. Would they try to scare her into silence like they had her dad? Victor adjusted his tie. "Don't worry, I'm documenting all of this. Let them watch." Within minutes, the bailiff called everyone back. Lexi could have sworn Judge Marshall walked slower than usual, a heaviness in his posture as he settled behind the bench. They resumed testimony with a final round of arguments. Reed hammered on Lexi's supposed hostility, painting her as a chronic agitator. But the phone clip contrasted starkly with that narrative, showing a young woman trying to shield herself from a larger uniformed figure. "Miss Knight," the judge finally said, "please summarize your defense before I rule on the assault charge." Lexi straightened, the hush of the room pressing in. "Your Honor, I was unwilling to comply with an unlawful policy. I was forcibly detained. The phone footage supports that the guard grabbed me first, and I merely tried to protect myself. Under the law, self-defense is permitted when someone's using unlawful force. Additionally, I believe this policy has deeper ties to corrupt dealings my father once exposed. That context reveals a broader motive: to intimidate or punish those who question authority. Regardless of how far we delve into that, the assault charge is unsubstantiated. I ask that the case be dismissed." She let the words settle. Reed gave a succinct rebuttal, repeating the claim that Lexi escalated the encounter by resisting. But the tension coiling in the judge's eyes told a different story. He was holding back a confession of sorts, or so Lexi sensed. At last he set down his pen. "This is highly unusual," he began, "but in light of the evidence, especially the video footage, I see insufficient grounds to convict Miss Knight of assault. The motion to dismiss is granted." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Reed opened her mouth, likely to protest or file an appeal, but the judge's decisive stare cut her short. "Court is adjourned," he said hoarsely, slamming his gavel. Lexi's legs felt like jelly. She turned to her mother, who wrapped her in an impulsive hug. They had won. She was free. Yet instead of triumph, she felt a roiling mix of relief and apprehension. The judge's abrupt dismissal didn't feel like an act of fairness alone. It seemed more like an act of conscience from a man in turmoil. As she turned to gather her papers, she noticed him standing at the bench, meeting her gaze with an expression that almost conveyed apology. Then he stepped away. Out in the hallway, media had gathered, alerted by the sensational details. Microphones jutted toward Lexi, reporters shouting questions about the teen who defended herself in court. Allison shielded her daughter, trying to usher her through the throng. But Victor James appeared, calmly but firmly guiding them to a side exit. "Any statement?" a persistent reporter called. Lexi lifted her chin. "I stood up for what's right, and I'm not done yet." Once outside, bright sunlight nearly blinded her. Her heart drummed with the knowledge that this victory was only a prologue. She had successfully fought off a false charge, but her father's disappearance and the corruption behind it remained unresolved. At least now the door was cracked open. If someone in power had quashed Daniel Knight's evidence, she was prepared to shine a spotlight on every last shadow. "Lex," her mother murmured, voice thick with emotion, "we should go home and rest." Lexi shook her head gently. "One stop first." She glanced at Victor. "You know people who can help dig deeper. You mentioned B. Carroll's name. Help me find out everything I can. We need to finish what Dad started." Victor James tapped the steering wheel with restless fingers as he drove Lexi and Allison through a quiet part of town, heading for a nondescript building that looked like an abandoned warehouse. Morning sunlight cut across the windshield in narrow beams, revealing dust floating in the stale car air. They had spent much of the night going through Daniel Knight's old files, searching for any clue that might help them follow his trail of evidence. Now, with Lexi's criminal case dismissed, they could focus on the deeper tangle of corruption she believed had led to her father's disappearance. Allison still looked pale and weary, but Lexi's eyes shone with a determination that bordered on defiance. "This is it," Victor muttered, parking near a metal gate. The sign overhead read, "Right-Way Distribution" in peeling paint. As soon as they stepped from the car, a swirl of wind kicked up trash from the pavement. Lexi squinted at the structure. It didn't look like a place where one might unearth bombshell documents. Victor beckoned them toward a rusted side entrance. "I keep certain materials in a secure location," he explained. "Old cases, notes, and digital backups Daniel shared with me before he vanished. I stored them here to ensure no one could easily trace or destroy them." Allison looked anxiously at Lexi, but Lexi only nodded. Since winning her dismissal in court, she felt an urgency to keep moving. Every victory in the legal realm was a step closer to the bigger truth. Who had orchestrated her father's downfall, and why? Inside, the warehouse felt even gloomier than its exterior promised. Flicking on a flashlight, Victor led them around wooden crates stacked haphazardly. Dust motes swarmed in the beam. The air smelled of mildew and old cardboard. At last he approached a steel door in the back corner. He withdrew a key from his coat pocket, unlocking it with a grunt. Beyond lay a cramped office lined with metal filing cabinets and sagging shelves. "I know it's not the most inviting place," Victor murmured, "but it's out of the way. Safer for you. And these records." A single overhead light flickered to life, revealing boxes marked with scribbled labels. Lexi's pulse quickened as she spotted a name on one box, Knight, scrawled in black marker. She moved toward it, her heart twisting at the sight. So many years had passed with no sign of Daniel beyond the occasional rumor. Now, any trace of him felt both precious and painful. Victor lifted the lid. Newspaper clippings, audio cassettes, typed notes on rumpled sheets. "We'll take anything referencing B. Carroll or Judge Marshall," he said. rifling through the contents. Allison stood by, arms folded around herself protectively, as if bracing for the emotional toll. Lexi plucked out a brittle newspaper from nearly 5 years earlier. The front page headline read, "Respected businessman donates to judicial campaign." Below it, in smaller print, local real estate developer B. Carroll invests heavily in municipal improvements. Daniel had scrawled a question mark in the margin, then underlined a key phrase describing undisclosed negotiations with city officials. She flipped the page and felt a chill. There, in a photograph from a campaign fundraiser, stood none other than Judge Marshall, much younger with darker hair, shaking hands with a man whose face was partly turned away. The caption named him as Carroll's attorney. Allison moved closer, peering over Lexi's shoulder. "That's him," she whispered, pressing a fingertip to the judge's figure. "He was the one presiding when your father first tried to present his evidence. I was there that day. I remember the tension in the courtroom." Lexi swallowed. So Dad suspected Marshall and Carroll were connected, or at least that Carroll's money shaped the outcomes in certain cases. Victor spread out other papers on a battered desk. "See this? Your father believed that Carroll's so-called philanthropic projects were actually fronts to siphon public funds. Roads that never got built, community centers that never opened. The judge apparently signed off on nuisance lawsuits and permit rulings that benefited Carroll, and there are references to hush payments, presumably to ensure compliance." Something in Lexi's chest grew heavy. If a judge was in league with a shady developer, he could bury countless lawsuits, silence whistleblowers, or dismiss damaging evidence, just like he had done for Daniel Knight. She felt her fingers curl against the brittle newspaper. "Is there any proof of actual crimes, aside from Dad's notes?" Victor nodded slowly. "We have partial logs, bank statements that your dad managed to copy from an insider. They show suspicious transfers linking Carroll's companies to an entity named Gables, Inc. That entity then funneled money to certain officials' campaign funds." He exhaled. "But missing is a clear statement from someone inside Carroll's operation, a direct link that can't be explained away." Allison sank onto a nearby stool. "So after Daniel tried to go public, they paid someone off to shut him down. Possibly threatened the judge, or maybe the judge was already corrupt, so all it took was an excuse to declare Daniel's evidence inadmissible. Then Daniel disappeared." The word weighed on the room, thick as dust. Lexi's eyes burned. For so long she had nursed a buried hope that her father might be out there, waiting for a chance to come home. But every clue pointed to a darker outcome. "We need to bring these files into the open," she said. "It's not enough to wave them around in front of local authorities who might be on Carroll's payroll. I got my own assault charge dismissed, but that was small potatoes compared to all this." Victor grimaced. "Once you go public, you become a target. Are you ready for that?" Lexi recalled the swirl of cameras after her hearing. "They already see me as the daughter of Daniel Knight, and after the judge's reaction, I suspect people in power know I'm poking around. I don't want to keep living in fear." She thought of the judge's pale face and trembling hands. If there was a shred of humanity left in him, maybe confronting him directly could yield some answers. "What if we confront Judge Marshall?" she asked, surprising both her mother and Victor. "Not in open court, but privately. Tell him we know about the hush money, about Carroll, about everything. See if he'll talk." Allison shook her head, alarmed. "He might deny everything and tip off Carroll's people. Or worse, he could set you up again." Lexi's jaw tightened. "I watched him. He seemed haunted. If he played a role in Dad's disappearance, maybe his conscience is eating him alive." Victor spread his hands. "It's a gamble, but I see where you're going. If we can get him to confess, even in part, that would crack this wide open." They decided to gather the most incriminating documents, scanning them into encrypted drives. Victor promised to arrange secure backups, just as Daniel had done once. That afternoon, with the sun dipping low, they locked the warehouse behind them. "We can't just sit on this," Lexi insisted when they were back in the car. "Carol's still out there pulling strings. The judge is signing rulings that might harm more people. Dad didn't vanish just to have us do nothing." Allison squeezed her daughter's shoulder, a complex mix of pride and fear in her eyes. "We'll be careful." That night, Lexi tried to sleep, but found her mind replaying the day's discoveries in endless loops. She pictured the newspaper photos, the spidery lines of her father's handwriting, the hush money logs. She imagined all the secrets choking that dark warehouse, waiting to explode into daylight. Eventually, she got up and paced, rummaging for a pen and notepad. She had done this countless times in the lead-up to her hearing, organizing facts, building an argument, preparing for battle. This time, the stakes were higher. She scrawled bullet points, approach Judge Marshall privately, reveal partial evidence, see if he'll confess or name others. Remind him of moral duty, father's disappearance, what's at risk. If he refuses, consider going to the press. Gather testimony from anyone else Dad trusted, who can corroborate. When morning came, she felt more certain. Allison, equally restless, emerged from her bedroom with a phone in hand. "I still have the judge's clerk's contact info from your father's old legal papers," she said quietly. "We can try to request a private meeting." "Do it," Lexi said, pulse jumping. Within the hour, they had arranged an appointment with the judge's clerk, using vague language about personal information regarding Daniel Knight. The clerk seemed puzzled but acquiesced, scheduling them for late the following afternoon, off the official docket. Lexi wondered if Judge Marshall realized who was seeking to see him. If he did, he made no move to block the request. They arrived at the courthouse with scanned copies of the documents tucked into Lexi's backpack. Victor came along, but he planned to wait outside, ready to whisk them away if things went south. The corridors were emptier than usual, the hour nearing the end of the workday. Lexi spotted a cleaning crew mopping the marble floors, their reflections hazy under fluorescent lights. She recalled walking those halls while under assault charges, how the stairs had felt like accusations. Now she returned as a free citizen, yet the tension was thicker than ever. A short, spectacled clerk led them into a small conference room near the judge's chambers. "Judge Marshall will be with you shortly," he said curtly, closing the door behind him. No windows, just fluorescent tubes casting harsh brightness over a round table. Allison settled to one side, arms folded. Lexi stood, unable to sit still, adrenaline making her restless. The seconds stretched. At last, the door opened, and Judge Marshall walked in, wearing his black robes unfastened at the neck. His eyes flicked from Lexi to Allison, then landed on the slim folder Lexi clutched. She saw his face tighten. He waited until the door was closed. Then, in a low voice, he asked, "Why did you request this meeting?" Lexi stepped forward, ignoring her nerves. "Because you know what happened to my father, and I think it's killing you inside." The judge stiffened. I don't know what you're implying." Allison's voice trembled. "Please, Your Honor. We have evidence that my husband was targeted after trying to expose B. Carroll's schemes, and that hush money changed hands to dismiss his claims. My husband disappeared right after. You were the presiding judge." Sweat beaded on Marshall's forehead. He opened his mouth, but no words emerged. Lexi placed a printout on the table, the same newspaper photo showing him with Carroll's attorney at a fundraiser. "I'm sure you remember," she said softly. "Were you forced into this, or did you choose it?" He shot her a haunted look. "I can't. You don't understand." "I don't," Lexi agreed. "But you can help me understand. You can set something right. Did you see the intimidation firsthand? Did they threaten you and your family? Are they the same people who took my father? Marshall's shoulders sagged. His voice, tight with anguish, barely reached her ears. I can't speak on that. Too many powerful men. Too many years. I let them bury your father's testimony, Miss Knight. And I was told you'd be safe if I cooperated. I didn't want him harmed, but... He shook his head, eyes full of regret. Allison's face went pale. Are you saying you knew Daniel was in danger? A tear slipped down the judge's cheek. I'm so sorry. He pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. I was weak. I was compromised by that bribe, and once they had me, there was no getting free. Then your husband, he wouldn't back down. I tried to warn him discreetly, but he wouldn't listen. Lexi's heart pounded. So they took him? He didn't answer directly. All I know is after that hearing was dismissed, men came to me and told me never to speak of Knight again. I heard rumors he was forcibly removed from the city. Allison looked ready to collapse. So he might still be alive? Judge Marshall let out a ragged breath. I truly don't know. They said it would be best if he disappeared permanently. I'd always hoped they might just drive him away, pay him off. I never confirmed it. But I fear the worst. For several seconds, no one spoke. A clock ticked in the background, mocking their stillness. Finally, Lexi forced herself to push on. Tell us who they are. Who gave you the bribe? Was it Carol? The judge's voice cracked. Carol's men acted as go-betweens. You have to understand he wields enormous power, political connections, financial muscle. I was trapped. Allison stepped forward, tears in her eyes. We can't bring Daniel back, but you can still help us expose these monsters. Will you testify? Will you confirm their involvement? A look of raw fear crossed Marshall's face. If I do, my career, my safety, my children... Lexi's anger flared. My father had a daughter, too. He fought anyway. The judge squeezed his eyes shut, shoulders shaking. Then he exhaled slowly. You're right. I can't keep living with this guilt. I'll tell you what I know. But we have to proceed carefully. Carol won't go down quietly. He has people watching every move. Lexi nodded, relief and dread mingling in her gut. We're ready. We have documents. We have backups. We just need your statement to tie it all together. Then we can go to federal authorities. He sank into a chair, looking older than his years. I'll give you names, bank details, everything I recall. I owe Daniel Knight that much. Judge Marshall sat slumped at the small conference table, head bowed, as though the last thread of his carefully contained composure had finally snapped. Lexi could see the tremor in his hands and the shallow rise and fall of his shoulders. She wondered if this moment, his decision to speak, was the same kind of pivotal instant her father must have faced years ago, back when he resolved to go public no matter the danger. Now it fell to them to gather his story, to turn his belated confession into something that could bring light to her father's fate. Allison leaned forward, voice hushed with a mix of anger and grief. You said Carol's men told you never to speak of Daniel again. If you can recall any detail about who they were, where they met you, how they approached you, anything at all, please tell us. Marshall pressed his palms against his eyes. They weren't men I recognized. They wore suits, had no badges. They mentioned Carol but never used his full name. They just said, he wants this to go away. Knight's claims will vanish if we all do our part. I was told that if I made trouble, my own secrets would come out. At the time, I'd accepted money from a developer's liaison to help cover a family medical bill. That was my weakness. Carol found it and pulled me in. Lexi placed a creased bank statement on the table, one Daniel had flagged in his notes. I think this is the transaction you're talking about, she said softly. My dad believed it was hush money, funneled through a shell company. He underlined your name and the date. Marshall's gaze dropped to the page, his features etched with shame. He wasn't wrong. I tried telling myself it was just a small favor, that it wouldn't compromise my rulings. But once I realized how deep it went, I was in too far. When your father came to present his evidence, I recognized how thorough he was. I wanted to warn him off, but I also knew that if the case broke wide open, my own wrongdoing would be public. Allison drew a shaky breath. So you dismissed my husband's case on a technicality. He swallowed. And soon after, men came to me at my house. They demanded I keep quiet. The next time I heard about your husband, it was a rumor floating in the courthouse. He'd left town, possibly coerced. Some said he was forced to sign an agreement never to return. Others claimed he'd been removed permanently. I was never certain of the details, but when I asked one of those men if Daniel was alive, he smirked. Alive enough, he said, which chilled me. A silence followed, broken only by the squeak of an old ventilation fan in the corner. Lexi glanced at her mother, who stared at the judge with eyes glistening, still clinging to the faintest thread of hope. Alive enough. That could mean anything. Maybe Daniel remained hidden in some far place, living under threat. Or maybe it was just a cruel phrase to keep them guessing. Lexi cleared her throat. We have documents and testimony from others who suspect B. Carroll. We can take it to federal authorities, but only if we can corroborate it with a sitting judge's statement. If you're willing to come forward, your admission could spark an official investigation at a higher level. Marshall's eyes flickered with apprehension. I'm not naive. Carroll can turn powerful figures against me. Even if I do the right thing, I could face indictment. Accepting that bribe was illegal. Allison's voice firmed. Help us, and we'll do our best to ensure you get leniency. But we can't promise anything. This is bigger than all of us. He hesitated, then squared his shoulders. I'll talk. I'll name every official I know who took money. I'll give every detail. That's what Daniel Knight deserved from me years ago. I can't bring him back, but maybe I can give you closure, and maybe, if he's still out there somewhere, an official investigation might draw him out, or free him. Lexi nodded, the knot in her chest loosening just enough to let in a shred of relief. Thank you, Judge Marshall, she whispered. They spent the next hour gathering his recollections, scribbling down names and dates, capturing that raw confession in bullet point form. Marshall refused to allow a recording device, still jittery about his words being leaked, before he could secure legal representation. Nonetheless, the notes were damning. Multiple local politicians had accepted questionable funds from Carroll-affiliated front companies. Judges beyond Marshall, attorneys, and at least one police commander had apparently benefited from payouts. Lexi's father had threatened to blow the whistle on this entire network, presenting thorough records. In response, they orchestrated his vanishing act, making sure no official hearing ever took place. When they finished, Marshall looked utterly spent. His face glistened with sweat, and the corners of his mouth trembled. Lexi felt a flicker of pity, though she remembered the harm he'd done. She told herself that pity did not cancel accountability. We'll compile this into a coherent brief, Allison said, voice still shaking, and approach federal prosecutors or the state attorney general. You'll have to speak directly to them, under oath. He nodded, gaze distant. I'll do it. But first I need to step down from the bench quietly so no one suspects. If word gets out prematurely, Carroll's people could vanish or target me. He rose unsteadily, heading for the door. Let me know as soon as you've arranged a meeting with the authorities. If I'm not protected, I could become a liability or worse. Allison reached out gently. We'll do our best to keep you safe. Marshall managed a half smile, wry and haunted, before slipping out. The door clicked behind him, leaving mother and daughter alone under the fluorescent glow. For a moment, Lexi just stared at the abandoned chair where the judge had sat, replaying his confession. He had all but confirmed that Daniel's evidence was real, that higher-ups had orchestrated a campaign of silence, and that Daniel might have been forced into some unknown fate. Allison's hand trembled as she ran it over her eyes. God, Lexi, what if your father's still alive somewhere, terrified and alone, and we've been here all this time, not knowing? Lexi put an arm around her mother, blinking back tears. We'll find the truth, she whispered. Either way, we're not stopping until we get answers. They left the courthouse by a side door, where Victor James was waiting anxiously on a bench. The moment he saw their expressions, he leaned in. You got him to talk? Lexi exhaled shakily. Yes, he confessed it all. We need to set up a safe path to federal authorities. People with no local ties, so Carol's connections won't undermine it. Victor gave a firm nod. There's a U.S. Attorney's office 2 hours away, known for prosecuting corruption cases. I have a contact there from a previous civil rights suit. We can start that route. Then he paused, noticing Allison's hollow stare. Are you two all right? Just trying to absorb the fact that Daniel was right all along, Allison replied quietly. And that this might put us all in danger. Carol's men could still be watching. Victor gestured toward his car. Let's head out. We'll talk more somewhere safe. The three of them drove in tense silence, the cityscape blurring past. Every so often, Lexi glanced in the rearview mirror, imagining cars full of Carol's associates trailing them. The glow of streetlights flickered across Allison's drawn face. She looked older than she had just days before, the strain mounting as old wounds reopened. They ended up back at Victor's dingy warehouse office, the place that had become their informal headquarters. After double-checking that no one followed them, they settled in with coffee and began drafting a plan. Victor insisted on writing out an outline for a formal affidavit. Lexi and Allison carefully typed up the bullet points from Marshall's confession, cross-referencing with Daniel's original notes. As Lexi scrolled through scanned images on her laptop, she felt a combination of pride and heartache. Pride that her father's meticulous evidence might finally see daylight, heartache that it had cost him everything. At one point, Allison rested a hand on Lexi's shoulder, voice tight with pain. If your father is alive, this could bring him back. If he isn't... She hesitated. At least we'll know what happened and make sure no one else disappears like this. Lexi pressed her lips together, refusing to let tears form. We owe him, and we owe all the families that might have been cheated by Carol's corruption. Every time a public fund was looted, real people were hurt. Victor stood and stretched, eyeing the battered clock on the wall. Let's keep going. We should have a draft ready before midnight. Then I'll contact my friend at the U.S. Attorney's office first thing in the morning. Time blurred into a haze of scanning, printing, verifying. Allison eventually dozed off at the desk, arms folded under her head. Lexi found a tattered blanket in the corner and draped it over her mother's shoulders. Then she pressed on, reading more of Daniel's scribbled margins, gleaning what new details she could about the times, places, and names. She discovered references to hush money handoffs in parking garages and back rooms of fancy restaurants. There were partial phone transcripts from an informant Daniel once trusted, though no real names were used. By the time the first faint glimmer of dawn crept through the grimy windows, they had assembled a rough affidavit summarizing not just Judge Marshall's confession, but also the supporting documents. Lexi's eyes burned with exhaustion, but her mind sparked with purpose. She turned to Victor. Next step, we go to the U.S. Attorney, right? Do we bring the judge with us? Victor exhaled, glancing at the notes. Not yet. We'll share the gist of it and see how they want to handle it. They might want to build a sealed case, then subpoena him or offer him protective custody. Carol is powerful, but a federal probe can change the game. Allison stirred awake, wincing as she sat up. What about us? If Carol realizes what we're about to do, he might try to silence us too. Lexi stood tall, remembering how her father always taught her to look a threat in the eye. We stay cautious, stick together, don't go anywhere alone. And once the feds are involved, hopefully, we'll have more formal protection. Victor set down his coffee cup. I'll drive us. Let's gather our things and hit the road. We can be at their office when they open. He cast a wary glance at the dusty overhead lamp. But be ready. The moment we file this, we can't hide anymore. The story's going to break. They agreed, hearts pounding. Lexi packed the files into secure folders, copying them onto a flash drive. Allison silently folded the tattered envelope Daniel had left behind, tucking it into her bag like a talisman. As they stepped out into the faint pink of early morning, the air smelled of dew and rusted metal. A stray cat darted between crates. For a moment, Lexi was painfully aware of how small they were, 3 people bracing for the wrath of a wealthy power broker with an army of enforcers. Yet she felt oddly sure. They might be small, but her father once said a single candle can banish the deep shadows if it keeps burning. She intended to be that flame. No more hiding, no more fear. If her father was still alive, she would find him. If he was gone, she would make his captors or killers answer for every day she and her mother had spent wondering, grieving, and waiting. With Judge Marshall's admission, they finally had momentum. Ready? Victor asked, keys in hand. Lexi let her gaze sweep the deserted alley, then nodded. Ready? Lexi pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the passenger window as Victor's car sped along the highway, the morning sky streaked with pale gold and lavender. Allison dozed in the back seat, arms crossed over a battered file box, as though fearful it might vanish if she let go. Victor gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, eyes flitting constantly between the road and the rearview mirror. None of them voiced the fear that maybe Carol's people would intercept them before they could reach the federal building. Yet the tension clung, thick as humidity in the enclosed cabin. They pulled off the freeway after 2 hours, rolling past lines of official-looking buildings. Victor's contact, Assistant U.S. Attorney Carla Price, had agreed to meet them in a side conference room rather than the main offices, presumably to minimize scrutiny. Lexi tried to calm her breathing as they parked in a lot behind a tall brown structure that bore an understated plaque, United States Attorney, District Offices. A uniformed guard eyed them from a small booth, then waved them forward after a brief check. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed in a maze of hallways that smelled of freshly printed paper and stale coffee. Carla Price emerged with a brisk smile and a handshake that felt both welcoming and impatient. Clearly a woman used to sifting through endless claims of wrongdoing. She was in her 40s, a pressed navy suit complementing her upright posture. Victor introduced Allison and Lexi, explaining that they had documents related to a potentially large-scale corruption scheme in their home county. Carla ushered them into a narrow room with a rectangular table and little else. Her eyes lingered on Lexi for a moment, a flicker of sympathy passing across her features, as if she recognized how young this unexpected whistleblower was. "Let's sit," Carla suggested, motioning to the table. "I want to hear the overview before we decide next steps." Lexi swallowed and began explaining how her father, Daniel Knight, uncovered suspicious financial dealings involving real estate developer B. Carroll, how local officials apparently took bribes to stifle investigations and sabotage lawsuits, and how these same individuals had threatened or removed anyone who challenged them. She tried to keep her voice steady, but her throat tightened when she mentioned Daniel's disappearance. Throughout the account, Carla took notes, occasionally leaning forward to ask clarifying questions. When Allison described Judge Marshall's secret confession, Carla's eyebrows lifted. "That's a significant piece," she said quietly. If a sitting judge is willing to testify under oath regarding bribes and intimidation, we're looking at potential racketeering charges, conspiracy, and possibly kidnapping or worse. Victor interjected, "We're aware it's dangerous. Marshall fears retaliation. He plans to step down from the bench soon. We also believe Carol has high-level allies, so we didn't want to go to local authorities." Carla studied the stack of evidence they'd brought, copies of Daniel's notes, coded references to shell companies, deposit slips. Lexi watched the attorney's expression intensify. "These logs appear thorough," Carla murmured. "If we can corroborate them with subpoenaed bank records, we might indeed be looking at a robust federal case. But let's set realistic expectations. Building an airtight prosecution against someone like Carol and the officials in his pocket takes time. We have to proceed discreetly. If they catch wind, they'll destroy documents, vanish money, or worse." Allison's voice quavered as she asked, "Can you force them to tell us what happened to my husband?" Carla exhaled slowly. "If he was abducted, threatened, or harmed, that's a separate but related matter. We'd push for answers in our investigation, but we can't guarantee we'll locate him or find out precisely what was done. I understand how painful that is." Lexi tried to keep her composure. "We just want the truth and accountability." Carla nodded, tapping her pen thoughtfully. "If Judge Marshall testifies, that could shake the entire network. But we need to protect him, and we need to protect you. Whistleblowers in conspiracies like this can be targets." Victor exchanged a glance with Lexi. "We're aware. What can you offer us in terms of protection?" "Potentially witness protection," Carla replied. "But that usually requires formal witness status. Miss Knight, you and your mother could qualify if your testimonies become critical. However, you'll have to weigh leaving your home, your lives, everything behind. It's not a light decision. We also might keep you under observation for your safety until we can execute coordinated raids or issue indictments." Allison paled. "I've already lost my husband. The idea of losing our home—" She broke off, inhaling shakily. "But if that's what it takes, I'll do it." Lexi's chest tightened. The notion of going into hiding felt suffocating. She thought of the routine she had just begun reclaiming, her renewed sense of belonging after beating the assault charges, and her determination not to run from fear. Yet the alternative, leaving themselves open to Carol's retribution, was terrifying. Carla rose, gathering a few documents. "First, I need to verify these logs. I'll assign an agent who specializes in financial forensics. Once we confirm authenticity, we'll convene a preliminary meeting with law enforcement on our end. Then we'll reach out to Judge Marshall for a sealed deposition." She paused, eyes flicking to Lexi. "You're a remarkable young woman stepping up like this. I've seen many adult whistleblowers fold under half the pressure you're facing." Lexi's cheeks warmed at the unexpected praise. "I'm just doing what my dad would have done." The attorney's gaze softened. "Well, I admire that. I'll do my best to ensure you're not left stranded. Expect a call from me soon, within days if the leads pan out. In the meantime, stay alert." They left with both relief and a fresh layer of anxiety settling in their bones. Outside, the midday sun felt glaring. Victor insisted on driving them back by a circuitous route, worried about potential tails. Lexi slumped in the front seat, mind reeling with the possibility that soon everything might unravel, for better or worse. They arrived at Allison's house in the late afternoon, stepping onto the porch in a stunned silence that had become all too familiar. The old wooden boards creaked under their weight. Victor lingered on the sidewalk, scanning the street as if expecting a black sedan to screech up any moment. At last he nodded. "No sign of trouble yet, but keep your phone on. I'll check in daily." Lexi and her mother watched him drive off, then entered the small living room. The air smelled of stale coffee and tension. Allison collapsed onto the couch, cradling the battered file box that held Daniel's memory. "Remember the day your father bought this place?" she murmured. "He said a humble home could be happier than any mansion if it was built on honest work. I can't believe how twisted life has become since he vanished." Lexi sank beside her, a swirl of guilt flickering. "I'm sorry for dragging you into all of this again." Allison's eyes flashed with sudden intensity. "You did nothing wrong. And we're not dragged in. We've been trapped for 4 years in a limbo of half-truths. Now, we finally have a chance to break free." That night, Lexi kept the curtains drawn, the doors locked. She tried distracting herself with homework, but every time she glanced at a textbook, her mind drifted to possible outcomes of the affidavit. Did Carol already suspect Judge Marshall was waffling? Would the judge even survive long enough to testify? She knew how these matters went in the darker corners of society. Money bought silence, or worse. She paced the hallway until Allison coaxed her into a shared bedtime ritual they'd used back when Lexi was little. They sipped chamomile tea at the kitchen table. In the lamplight, Lexi could see her mother's weary face, yet also a spark of resolute will. She recognized that expression as the one Allison used to wear when Daniel called late, saying he had fresh evidence to piece together and she needed to keep him motivated despite her own fears. After a fitful sleep, Lexi woke early to the beep of her phone, a text from an unknown number. She sat up, heart thudding. For a second she worried it might be a threat, but as she opened it, a wave of relief and apprehension hit her. It read, "Miss Knight, this is AUSA Carla Price. Preliminary checks are promising. Please be ready to meet with an FBI agent on Monday, same location. Security protocols in place. Urgent matter. We'll explain details in person." Lexi let out a shaky exhale. Monday was only 2 days away. She hurried to share the news with Allison over breakfast. The older woman set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "So soon." "Better than waiting," Lexi reasoned. "Carol might strike if we give him enough time. We have to move fast." They spent the weekend in a surreal vigil, half expecting ominous phone calls or suspicious cars idling outside. But nothing happened, just ordinary suburban stillness. Lexi visited the corner store for groceries and found her neighbors smiling as always. It felt bizarre how normal life appeared while they prepared for a possible federal takedown. Monday arrived with a haze of clouds overhead. Victor once again picked them up, driving them to the U.S. Attorney's office, though he changed lanes repeatedly and took unexpected turns, checking for tails. By the time they parked, Allison looked queasy from all the swerving. Lexi gently squeezed her mother's hand in apology. Inside, Carla Price greeted them with a serious expression. Beside her stood a tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp black suit, his hair cropped short. "Special Agent Manuel Herrera, FBI," Carla introduced. "He's been briefed on your affidavit. We have reason to believe you might be at immediate risk." Herrera's tone was calm but firm. "We received intel indicating that Carol's circle is aware something big is unfolding. They've been making last-minute bank transfers, possibly preparing to flee. We want to move quickly, but we need your cooperation, and Judge Marshall's." Victor spoke up. "He's ready to talk if guaranteed some form of protective custody. He said he'd meet us anywhere that's safe." Carla nodded. "We can arrange that. Tomorrow at dawn, we want Marshall in a secure location for a formal deposition. We'll record his statement, gather any final evidence, then we'll coordinate with multiple agencies to issue warrants against Carol and his associates. This has to happen simultaneously, or they'll slip away." Lexi's pulse soared. So soon. Could it really be happening? She noticed Allison's hand gripping the file box until her knuckles whitened. "What do we do?" Lexi asked. Herrera turned his measured gaze on her. "We want you two in protective custody from now until we make arrests. Once we seize Carol's assets and arrest key players, the threat level should drop. But if you choose not to enter protection, we can't guarantee your safety." Allison exchanged a pained look with Lexi. She recalled the attorney's earlier warning that witness protection might mean leaving everything behind. Still, the alternative was far more dangerous. "We'll do it," Allison said quietly. "Just let me grab a few personal items from home." Carla glanced at Agent Herrera, who gave a short nod. "We can arrange a quick stop, with an agent escorting you. Then we'll settle you into a safe house for the night. In the morning, we get Judge Marshall's deposition, and if all goes well, we'll dismantle Carol's operation before noon." Lexi could barely speak. The swirl of relief that they had a plan mingled with dread about the potential blowback. She clutched her backpack straps. "If we do this, will we get any new information about my father?" Carla's voice softened. "I promise we'll press every suspect for the truth. If he's alive, we'll find him. If not, we'll confirm what happened. This investigation is wide-ranging. People will be scrambling to cut deals with us, so someone might have direct knowledge of your father's fate." Lexi nodded, blinking back tears. "Then let's do it." Before they left, Carla gave them a quiet moment in the hallway. Victor hovered protectively, arms folded. Allison wiped her eyes, whispering, "This is it, Lex. One way or another, tomorrow changes everything." Lexi tried to steel herself. She thought of her father's old notebooks, the hush-money logs, the judge's trembling confession. Every step thus far had led them to this threshold. "I'm ready," she murmured, trying to believe it. Outside, the sky remained overcast, as if nature sensed the tension. Agent Herrera directed them to an unmarked SUV waiting by a side entrance. "We'll do a quick pickup of your belongings at home, then head straight to a safe house. My partner's trailing us, so we'll have 2 vehicles to deter any interception." Victor patted Lexi's shoulder. "I'll meet you at the safe house after I finalize some personal matters. Don't worry, I'll be there." Lexi managed a thin smile, watching him head off. Seconds later, she and Allison climbed into the SUV. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cleaning solution. Herrera slid into the driver's seat, adjusting the rearview mirror. Another agent, a silent woman in a dark suit, settled in the passenger seat, studying a phone map. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Lexi looked back at the U.S. Attorney's building shrinking behind them. Tomorrow morning, everything hinged on Judge Marshall's testimony. She pictured him, haunted and nervous, preparing to reveal secrets he'd hidden for years. She prayed he wouldn't lose his nerve. The road stretched ahead, dull gray under the heavy sky. With every passing minute, they came closer to either unmasking a powerful ring of corruption or facing the fury of men who'd proven they would go to extreme lengths to keep their hold on power. Lexi swallowed, heart throbbing in her chest. For better or worse, the reckoning was almost here. The SUV's tires crunched over the gravel driveway as Agent Herrera maneuvered the vehicle up to Allison's modest home. The overcast afternoon sky cast a grayish filter over the neighborhood. From the back seat, Lexi noticed how strangely different the place looked after their decision to enter witness protection. She had grown up here, playing on that small front yard, peeling paint from the porch's banister. Now, she wasn't even sure when or if she'd be back. Allison shifted uncomfortably. "I'll just grab some clothes and important keepsakes," she murmured, her voice tight. "Lexi, see if there's anything you need." Herrera glanced over his shoulder. "We'll wait by the door. Make it quick, okay? Don't linger." Lexi nodded, unbuckling her seatbelt and stepping out. The house felt like it had shrunk. Or maybe she had grown since the last time she walked through that door in relative calm. Everything was fraught now. She helped her mother gather a few essentials, personal documents, family photos, a sweater that belonged to Daniel. Even as they grabbed items, Lexi felt an odd sense of detachment, wondering if she'd have to start a new life far from here. Would she ever return to her bedroom with its faded glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling? They finished packing a small suitcase and emerged to find Herrera on the porch. The other agent stood at the edge of the yard scanning the quiet street. A hint of a breeze rattled the mailbox. "Let's get moving," Herrera said softly. They locked the door, and Lexi found herself staring at the chipped paint on the porch steps, the little cracks in the old wood. Memories pressed in. The day her father had carried her piggyback up these very steps, pretending to be a horse, or how she and her mother would watch summer rainstorms from the porch swing that once hung here. She tore her gaze away, following her mother and the agents back to the SUV. Before she climbed in, she noticed a car turning the corner. A slick black sedan. The driver slowed momentarily, as if eyeing them, then continued past. Lexi's heart did a quick stutter, but the sedan disappeared. She hoped it was nothing. They drove for about an hour, turning off the main highway onto a winding route of back roads. Trees pressed in from both sides, branches drooping like silent sentinels. Lexi wondered if this was part of standard procedure, taking random turns and staying off well-traveled paths to obscure their destination. Finally, the SUV veered onto a narrow lane, flanked by tall pines, and came upon a small house set deep in the woods. It looked more like a hunting cabin than a safe house, complete with a sagging porch, half-hidden windows, and a faint odor of damp leaves. A second vehicle was already there, a plain sedan. Two agents stood guard by the front steps, nodding curtly as Herrera parked. "We'll keep you here overnight," Herrera explained, shutting off the engine. "My partner and I will be in the next cabin over, keeping watch. A small team will rotate patrol. Tomorrow morning we'll escort you and Judge Marshall to the deposition site." Lexi took a breath, stepping onto the pine needle-strewn ground. The air was brisk, the sun dipping behind a canopy of green, and for a moment she felt a flutter of apprehension. But as they entered the cabin, she found it reasonably stocked. A living area with a worn couch, a tiny kitchen, 2 bedrooms with simple beds, plus a bathroom that looked newly cleaned. Another agent, a woman in her 50s, introduced herself as Agent Weathers and handed them a slip of paper with emergency numbers. "Cell service is spotty, so we have a landline. Use it if you hear or see anything suspicious." Allison's eyes flicked to Lexi, who forced a reassuring nod. They were on the verge of dismantling a criminal conspiracy. One more night. They could do this. They settled in, setting their suitcases by the couch. Despite the tension, Allison insisted on heating up some canned soup from the pantry for dinner, muttering something about needing a shred of normalcy. Lexi paced, studying the trees through the window. At one point she spotted Herrera and the second agent outside, conferring with hushed voices and scanning the perimeter. When darkness fell, the cabin's lamps cast a dim, cozy glow that contrasted sharply with the tense atmosphere. Allison perched on the couch, mindlessly flipping channels on a tiny TV. Static. Faint signals. She finally gave up. Lexi sat at the kitchen table, reading over a copy of the affidavit they'd prepared. Her eyes lingered on her father's name. She felt a chill imagining that he might be somewhere in the world, locked away or forced into hiding. After a while, Allison spoke quietly. "I'm going to call your grandparents and say we're taking a trip. I don't want them worried if they don't hear from us." "Good idea," Lexi replied, "but be vague." Allison nodded. She walked to the landline phone near the wall. The old rotary device looked out of place in the modern age. She dialed, then waited. "Hi, Mom," Allison said in a hushed tone when her mother picked up. "Yes, Lexi's fine." We just got an opportunity to go away for a bit. Don't worry if you don't reach us. We'll call when we can." Lexi could hear the faint crackle of her grandmother's concerned voice. Allison repeated reassurance after reassurance, then hung up. She breathed in deeply. "I hate lying to them, but—" Lexi nodded. "We'll tell them the truth when it's safe." Time drifted in slow motion. The agents outside changed shifts. The clock over the sink ticked steadily. Finally, Allison retreated to one bedroom, insisting Lexi take the other. "Try to rest," she said, though they both knew sleep would be elusive. Lexi tried anyway, lying fully clothed atop the bedspread. Moonlight filtered through the thin curtains, creating shifting shadows on the floor. Her mind played a carousel of possible outcomes, each more daunting than the last. She glanced at the phone on the nightstand, thinking of Judge Marshall. Would he follow through in the morning, or lose his nerve? If he failed to appear, the entire plan might crumble, and Carol would remain untouchable. A faint creak in the hallway made her sit up. It was Allison, standing in the doorway. "Still awake?" her mother whispered. "Yeah." Allison came in, closing the door softly behind her. She sank onto the bed beside Lexi, voice barely above a breath. "You remind me so much of your father when you get that determined look in your eyes." Lexi swallowed. "He taught me not to let fear stop me from doing what's right." Allison touched her daughter's hand. "I'm proud of you. No matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to remember that." They shared a quiet moment. Then Allison kissed Lexi's forehead and slipped back to her own room. Lexi lay there, gazing at the ceiling. Outside, the wind hissed through pine needles, lending a ghostly hush. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her swirling thoughts. At some point in the night, she startled awake to the sound of distant voices. Her heart hammered. She scrambled to the window, peeking through the curtain, two silhouettes by the tree line. Agents, she realized with relief. They seemed relaxed, probably just chatting during their patrol. She exhaled, returning to bed, trying to slow her pulse. Only a few more hours until dawn. She needed every scrap of sleep to face the day ahead. She finally slipped back into uneasy slumber, roused only by the soft knock at her door around sunrise. Agent Weathers popped her head in. "Time to get ready. We're moving in an hour." Groggy, Lexi washed her face in the small bathroom, then changed into jeans and a warm sweatshirt. She found Allison in the kitchen, sipping coffee so strong that Lexi wrinkled her nose at the scent. Herrera was by the front window, scanning the driveway with a pair of binoculars. When Lexi entered the living room, he lowered them. "Cars are in position," he said. "We'll head out soon, pick up Judge Marshall, and proceed to a secure federal site where he'll give a sworn statement. After that, we coordinate with Price and others to launch simultaneous operations against Carol's known affiliates." Lexi's heart thumped. "And after the statement, what happens with us?" Herrera brushed invisible dust from his suit. "If all goes well, you two will meet with Carla Price to go over any remaining questions. Then, if you feel comfortable, you can remain in protective custody until the initial arrests are made. Once Carol is arrested or on the run, the situation changes." Allison swallowed, nodding. "We're ready." They packed swiftly, stepping onto the porch where the morning air held a fresh chill. Agent Herrera and Agent Weathers walked them to the SUV. "We'll have two vehicles again," Herrera told them, gesturing at a second car parked under the pines. "We'll form a small convoy, picking up Marshall at an agreed-upon location halfway between here and the city. He insisted on secrecy, so we're meeting him in a parking garage." Lexi bit back a surge of anxiety. A parking garage sounded exposed, but perhaps that was part of the plan. Harder to spot from the outside, quick to exit once they had him on board. She climbed into the back seat, her mother beside her. As the SUV rumbled to life, she stared at the cabin through the window, uncertain if she'd ever come back. She wasn't sure she wanted to. The place carried too much tension, too many sleepless hours. The drive began uneventfully. They cruised along winding roads, then eased onto a more direct route, the rising sun illuminating patches of farmland and distant hills. Lexi tensed with each passing mile, half expecting trouble. But the roads remained quiet, hardly any traffic this early. Agent Weathers, riding shotgun, occasionally murmured into a two-way radio, confirming the other car's position. Her clipped responses indicated all was smooth. They reached the outskirts of a mid-sized city, heading toward a concrete parking structure near a row of office buildings. Herrera steered in carefully, each tire echoing on the gray ramps, flickering lights overhead. It was a typical multi-level garage: dim corners, oil stains on the ground, stairwells that smelled of stale exhaust. A black sedan sat near a column, alone on that floor. "That's him," Herrera said, pointing to the sedan. Lexi leaned forward, spotting a solitary figure in the driver's seat. Judge Marshall, presumably, waiting with the engine idling. The second SUV in their convoy parked a short distance away, its headlights still on. Herrera pulled up nearby. "Stay here," he instructed Allison and Lexi gently. "We'll bring him to you." He and Agent Weathers exited. Through the tinted windows, Lexi watched them approach the judge's sedan. She saw Marshall emerge in his rumpled suit, expression haggard, eyes darting around. Herrera placed a firm hand on his shoulder, giving a reassuring nod. Judge Marshall wiped sweat from his brow, stepped toward the SUV. Lexi's pulse hammered, relieved he had shown up. One more step to keep the plan alive. The judge appeared ready, if terrified. But as he neared their car, a sudden screech echoed through the concrete space. Lights flashed. Lexi whipped her head around. Another vehicle, massive and dark, barreled up the ramp, tires squealing, engine roaring in the enclosed structure. Herrera and Weathers spun, hands going to their concealed holsters. The second SUV roared to life, agents scrambling to respond. But it happened too fast. The large van skidded sideways, blocking the exit, doors flung open. Men in black outfits jumped out, guns raised. Shouts reverberated in the concrete canyon. Lexi felt her mother gasp beside her. Judge Marshall froze in place, eyes wide. "No, no!" Herrera dropped behind the sedan, returning fire as bullets ricocheted off metal pillars. The second SUV's agents took cover and responded in kind. Lexi's heart drummed wildly, adrenaline spiking as she huddled low in her seat, ducking. Glass cracked. She heard Allison stifle a scream. The men in black advanced, methodical, like a well-trained squad. Lexi caught a glimpse of Marshall scrambling behind a column. Herrera tried to cover him, firing measured shots, but the attackers had the upper hand. They'd planned an ambush, and they knew exactly where to strike. A wave of blind panic overtook Lexi as one masked assailant pivoted toward their SUV, weapon gleaming. She grabbed Allison's arm, dragging her to the floor. Gunfire hammered her ears. Shouts from the federal agents, muzzle flashes sparking the gloomy garage. Every second felt stretched and surreal. She blinked, disoriented. If Carol's men were here, they'd come to stop the judge from talking, and possibly to silence Lexi and her mother. Sweat trickled down her face. She prayed the agents could hold them off. Through the chaos, she saw Marshall attempting to flee toward the ramp. The men in black pivoted, one firing in his direction. Marshall staggered, letting out a choked cry, and collapsed. Lexi's breath seized in her throat. Herrera roared something, returning fire again, emptying his clip, but the assailants kept coming. The second SUV revved, ramming forward, trying to block the van from escaping. Then, amid the screech of tires and the pandemonium of gunshots, Lexi heard a shout, "Cover your ears!" She barely had time to register the words before a deafening flashbang went off. A blinding burst of light and thunderous noise shook the concrete. She pressed her hands over her ears, eyes squeezed shut. When her vision returned, smoke hung in the air, and she heard engines racing, shouts trailing off. In the confusion, the dark-clad figures clambered back into their van. Metal shrieked as the van reversed, pushing past the second SUV. In seconds, they screeched down the ramp and disappeared, leaving echoes of chaos. Silence fell, punctuated only by the cough of an agent catching his breath. Lexi dared to lift her head. Her mother trembled beside her. Agent Weathers appeared at the driver's door, eyes wide, gun still in hand. "Stay down," she panted. "We have casualties." Herrera rushed to the fallen judge, kneeling. Lexi caught sight of Marshall's motionless form, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Her stomach lurched. If he was dead, their last hope at a direct confession might have just died with him. Gunpowder smoke lingered under the grim light of the parking garage, curling into every corner while muffled echoes of the attack still bounced off concrete walls. Lexi pressed herself low against the SUV's seat, straining to see if Judge Marshall was still breathing. Agent Herrera leaned over him, checking for a pulse, barking orders at the other agents. His words blurred in her ears, but she could read the urgency in his every motion. Her mother, pale with shock, clutched Lexi's arm so tightly that Lexi felt her nails digging through her sweatshirt. Agent Weathers yanked the passenger door open, posture rigid as her gaze swept the garage. "Stay down," she ordered, voice trembling only slightly. "We'll secure the area." Lexi's heart hammered. In the back of her mind, she recognized how carefully orchestrated this ambush was. Carroll's men must have known precisely when and where Judge Marshall would appear. Either there was a leak among the agents, or someone else had managed to track their movements. She dared to peer out the open door, spotting a black puddle on the ground under Marshall's body. Herrera tore off his jacket, pressed it to the wound. "Stay with me," he snarled. "We need you alive." One of the other agents from the second SUV approached with a first aid kit. He crouched beside Herrera, ripping gauze and tape free, packing it against Marshall's chest. Lexi strained to hear if the judge was speaking, but all she caught was a labored wheeze. She felt her mother move behind her. Then Allison's voice cracked. He's alive," Herrera called back. "For now." A wave of relief coursed through Lexi, followed immediately by dread. If Carroll's men were willing to unleash gunfire on federal agents in broad daylight, what else would they do to keep Marshall and everyone else silent? Agent Weathers swiftly examined the other agents, checking for injuries. The second SUV was riddled with bullet holes. One tire sat flattened, the front crumpled where it had tried to block the attacker's van. The men in black had vanished, squealing down the ramps, and no one seemed sure which direction they had gone after exiting the structure. Finally, Weathers gave an urgent gesture. "We need an ambulance," she shouted at another agent by the sedan. "And backup. Now." The agent grabbed his radio, relaying frantic calls. But the deserted floors and echoing ramps made Lexi's skin crawl. She had no idea how many more attackers might still be lurking. Herrera carefully lifted Marshall's torso, grimacing at the blood that soaked the front of the judge's shirt. "We've got to get him out of here." The paramedics arrived after what felt like an eternity. Though Lexi's watch showed only 9 minutes, a pair of them hurried across the concrete, knees scuffing as they dropped to Marshall's side. In the swirling chaos of bandages and oxygen masks, Lexi rose shakily, stepping out of the SUV onto trembling legs. Allison followed, equally unsteady. Agent Weathers hovered protectively, scanning for further threats. One paramedic turned to Herrera, speaking in clipped, urgent tones. "We'll stabilize him en route, but it's critical we get to the hospital now." Herrera's jaw flexed. "He's under federal protection. I'm riding with him. Let's go." Lexi heard him give instructions to the other agents, who nodded and spread out to secure the scene, caution tape already coming out of pockets. The ambulance shrieked off, taillights reflecting red against the grim concrete pillars. Herrera disappeared with them, leaving Weathers and 2 other agents in charge of Lexi and Allison. "This is a crime scene now," Weathers told them softly, holstering her gun. "We still need to get you both somewhere safe. Let's move." She gestured to the second SUV, the one now riddled with bullet holes. "We'll have to use yours instead," she told one of the other agents, "because this one's out of commission." They looked at Herrera's vehicle, also peppered with damage but functional enough to drive. Its tires, though nicked, hadn't gone flat. The windshield was cracked, but visibility seemed acceptable. Weathers radioed for additional backup to secure the entire structure. Allison stared at the congealing blood on the pavement. "My God," she whispered, her face chalk white. "That was an execution attempt." Weathers nodded grimly, ushering them into the less damaged SUV. "This isn't just intimidation anymore. Carroll's people are going for outright elimination. Judge Marshall was the biggest threat to their operation, and possibly you two as well." A chill radiated up Lexi's spine. If the attack had gone a shade differently, she and her mother might be the ones bleeding out on the concrete. She climbed into the back seat, hands shaking, heart still banging in her chest. Allison followed, tears tracking down her cheeks. As Weathers drove them out of the garage, sirens wailed from multiple directions, cops and additional agents converging on the scene. Lexi watched them flash by through the rear window, feeling surreal detachment. She'd never witnessed a real shootout. The images felt more like something from an action film, except for the coppery smell lingering in her nostrils, the acrid gunpowder tang. They merged onto a main road. Weathers turned her head slightly. "I'm getting instructions from HQ. We'll likely relocate you to another safe site, maybe even out of state. We need distance." Allison's voice trembled. "What about Judge Marshall? What if he—" "We'll monitor his condition," Weathers assured. "If he pulls through, we can still get his testimony. But right now, you two remain priority witnesses. Carroll's people will be desperate to tie up loose ends." Lexi squeezed her eyes shut, overwhelmed by guilt and frustration. They'd come so close. Everything was planned. Now it lay in shambles, with Marshall's life hanging by a thread. She knew the conspiracy was bigger than one man, but he had been the linchpin for the feds to move swiftly. Without him, they might struggle to prove the direct link between Carroll's money and corrupt rulings. "Can't we still proceed with the documents we provided to Carla Price?" she asked. "Isn't that enough to arrest Carroll's network?" Weathers inhaled, navigating a sharp turn. "I'm not fully in the loop, but from what I've gathered, the documents are strong circumstantial evidence. A sworn statement by an active judge, however, is the knockout punch that ensures convictions. Without it, everything might drag on or get contested as hearsay, especially if powerful lawyers get involved. Our best hope is that he survives to confirm it all." Lexi tasted bitterness in her mouth. She pressed a fist against her knee, fighting tears. "I can't believe they almost killed him right in front of us." Allison stroked Lexi's hair softly. "Let's just hope the medics can save him." Her voice hitched on the last words, miles blurred beneath the tires. At some point, Weathers answered a phone call on speaker. Carla Price's voice resonated in the car. "I just got word. Marshall is in critical condition. Bullet wound to the lung, significant blood loss. He's in surgery now." Lexi's mother clasped her hands together. "Oh, God." Carla paused, as if letting them absorb the gravity. Then her voice turned clinical. "We suspect a leak. Only a handful of people knew the judge's location. We're pushing the investigation from a different angle, but we need to hide Lexi and Allison deeper in protective custody, immediately." Weathers responded, "Understood, ma'am. I'm taking them north. We'll coordinate with the nearest field office." Another pause. "Lexi, are you there?" Carla asked gently. Lexi swallowed. "I'm here," she managed. "Listen, I'm sorry this happened, but I promise we won't stop. Agent Herrera is with the judge. I'll keep you updated on any change in his status. In the meantime, hang tight. You're under federal protection now, and we'll handle the takedown strategy once we regroup." The call ended, leaving a fraught silence in its wake. The SUV surged onto a highway ramp, heading north as Weathers had said. Lexi gazed out at passing signs, each mile marker taking her and her mother farther from everything familiar. She couldn't stop picturing the judge crumpling to the ground, haunted eyes wide in shock. He'd risked his life to atone for his sins. Now no one could say if that sacrifice would pay off. She felt fury blooming in her chest. Fury at Carol, at the men with guns, at the entire system that had allowed corruption to fester. Her father had vanished for exposing those same criminals, and now, after all these years, they were still at large, still brutal. When they paused at a gas station to switch drivers, Agent Weathers was relieved by another agent from the second car. Allison stepped out briefly to breathe. Lexi stayed put, feeling too numb to move. She watched her mother on the curb, shoulders sagging with exhaustion. The new agent introduced himself as Special Agent Riley, a younger man with a serious demeanor. "I'll get you to a field office upstate," he said. "They have a secure building where you can stay until we figure out the next move." Back on the highway, the scenery turned rural, pine forests and rolling hills. Dusk approached, painting the sky in muted oranges and grays. Lexi vaguely registered hunger gnawing at her stomach, but her nerves had eaten any appetite. After another hour, Agent Riley exited onto a narrow road flanked by dense woods, not unlike the first safe house. The SUV rumbled over potholes until they reached a tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Beyond it was a low-slung concrete structure, official-looking despite its remote setting. Riley flashed credentials at a guard station, and the gates groaned open. Inside, a handful of plain-clothed staff milled about, offering quick nods. This was no cozy cabin, but rather a government facility with tight corridors and minimal decor. They were shown to a small suite of rooms, 2 bedrooms, a shared bath, and told to remain inside unless escorted. Riley assured them it was standard procedure for high-priority witnesses. Allison sank onto one of the narrow beds, pressing her palms against her eyes. I don't even know how to process it. Lexi sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're alive. That's something." She tried for a reassuring tone, though inside adrenaline still coursed. Images of bullets hitting pillars, the judge crumpling down, wouldn't leave her mind. A female staffer knocked gently, entered with a tray of sandwiches and bottled water. She spoke in a kind but businesslike manner. "You'll have to stay here at least until morning. The office is coordinating with Carla Price and the other agents. Don't worry, we have guards on all exits." Allison managed a polite smile. The woman left, and they were alone again. Tentatively, they each took a sandwich, chewing in silence. The bread felt dry, their throats tight. Finally, Allison set hers aside and spoke, voice quivering. "Daniel wanted to protect us from this. He never wanted us swept into danger, but the danger keeps chasing us anyway." Lexi swallowed a lump. "It's not just about Dad anymore. It's about stopping people who shoot judges in parking garages, who bribe public officials without consequences. If they got away with that, they'll keep doing worse." She inhaled shakily. "Carol's reach is terrifying, but we can't let him win." Allison nodded, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. I'm scared for you." Lexi squeezed her mother's hand. "I know. Me too." The next hour crawled by. Lexi perched on the bed, her foot bouncing with nervous energy. Memories of her father's presence hung around her, fueling resolve. She thought of how Daniel used to encourage her stubborn streak whenever she found something unjust. "That's the night spirit," he'd say, ruffling her hair. "Never let them tell you wrong is right." Suddenly, there was a tap at the door. Agent Riley entered, brow furrowed. "We got news from the hospital." Lexi bolted upright. "Judge Marshall?" Riley nodded. "He's out of surgery. He made it, though he's in intensive care. Doctors say it's touch and go, but they stabilized him enough that he can speak a bit." Allison let out a trembling exhale. "That's good." "Yes, ma'am," Riley agreed. "We're hoping he recovers well enough to testify in a more formal setting. Meanwhile, Price told me to let you know that they're reevaluating the plan. They'll likely go for arrests once they confirm Marshall's condition, or if they gather enough intel on the attackers. We're coordinating with law enforcement all across the state." Relief washed over Lexi, though it was tinged with caution. Marshall was alive, which meant the possibility of a direct confession still existed. But if Carroll's men had the nerve to launch a daytime ambush, there was no telling what they'd do next. "Do we have any idea where Carroll's men are now?" Riley shook his head. "Not yet. The local PD had roadblocks, but the attackers slipped away. We found a burned-out van in an industrial lot, likely their getaway vehicle. No leads on the shooters themselves." Lexi's stomach knotted. Carroll's foot soldiers could be anywhere, maybe regrouping for another strike. She looked at her mother, who shut her eyes in weary acceptance. They were trapped in a waiting game, pinned down by the looming threat of violence. As the evening wore on, staffers brought them dinner, which neither touched much. Allison tried to call her parents, but they stuck to the same vague story about being on a trip, avoiding any reference to gunshots or corruption. Eventually, they both decided to retire to separate rooms, though neither felt particularly safe. Lexi flipped off the overhead light, lying on top of the stiff bed, fully clothed. Moonlight seeped through a narrow barred window. In that half-darkness, her thoughts swirled. Her father's disappearance, Judge Marshall's near-fatal ambush, Carroll's deadly network. She tried to summon her father's voice. "Don't let fear freeze you, kiddo. Fear should sharpen you, make you more aware." She took steady breaths, resolving to stay sharp, to persevere until the truth broke open. She drifted in and out of a shallow sleep, jerking awake at every faint sound in the building's corridors. Once, she thought she heard footsteps outside her door, but they soon faded. Time seemed meaningless, a blur of anxiety and exhaustion. At last, she fell into a deeper doze, until a sudden buzz from the hallway's overhead speaker jolted her. Her door rattled. "Lexi?" Her mother's voice called, muffled. "They just called us. Something's happening." Lexi shot up. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m. She swung open the door. Allison stood there, eyes wide, hair rumpled from lying down. An agent hovered behind her, breathless. "Get dressed," he said. "We have to move, now." Alarm seized Lexi. "Why? What's going on?" "We just got intel," the agent replied, voice taut. "Carroll's men might have identified this facility. A security breach. Someone spotted a suspicious vehicle outside the perimeter. We're relocating you, pronto." Lexi's pulse thundered. "In the middle of the night?" "Better than waiting to be cornered again," he snapped, then forced a calmer tone. "Please gather any belongings. We have a secure transport on standby." Allison inhaled unsteadily, then looked at Lexi. "All right, let's go." They dressed in under a minute. Lexi grabbed her backpack. Her mother clutched the small suitcase and Daniel's old documents. They stepped into the corridor, which buzzed with frenetic activity. Agents barking into radios, pulling on jackets, checking weapon clips. Lights glared overhead. The fear in the air was palpable. Agent Riley appeared, motioning them forward. "We're moving out the rear exit. Another safe house is prepped further north. This one's a federal training center, more secure. Follow me." Barely awake, adrenaline firing, Lexi allowed herself to be hustled down a hall, through a heavy metal door leading out into a fenced yard. The wind whipped her hair and she caught sight of tall floodlights glaring across the compound. She glimpsed an SUV idling at the gate, headlights cutting through the darkness. A shout from behind made her turn. Another agent stumbled out, calling for assistance, something about the cameras going offline. The tension ratcheted up. Agents moved like an emergency drill. Before she could fully register it, Lexi found herself and her mother shoved into the back seat of the waiting SUV. Doors slammed. Agent Riley hopped into the driver's seat. Two more agents scrambled in behind, and the vehicle lurched forward, zipping through the open gate into the blackness beyond. Lexi's breath came in quick bursts as the SUV hurtled through the night, headlights slicing through dark trees on the narrow back road. Agent Riley drove with fierce concentration, eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the twisting route ahead. In the seat beside him, another agent held a handheld radio, snapping out updates to whoever was on the other end. Every few seconds, the agent's gaze darted through the windows, as if expecting a pair of glaring headlights to surge up behind them at any moment. Allison clutched Lexi's hand so tightly that Lexi's fingers tingled. She could feel the tremor running through her mother's body, still rattled from the shooting in the parking garage. Their rapid departure from the remote government facility in the middle of the night underscored just how precarious their situation was. Carol's men seemed capable of breaching any defenses. The steady hum of the engine provided little comfort. "Are we safe?" Allison asked, her voice tight with strain. The second agent, a woman with a curt manner, cast her a fleeting glance before focusing on the radio again. Lexi wondered if the agent was simply too tense to reassure them, or if she genuinely had no reassurance to give. Riley navigated a sharp curve, gravel crunching beneath the tires. "Safe is relative," he said, jaw clenched. "We're heading for a federal training center about 30 miles north. Heavily guarded, bigger perimeter. Less likely they'll try to stage an ambush out of nowhere." His voice vibrated with urgency, as though each word needed to push them forward faster. Lexi remembered Judge Marshall bleeding on the concrete, surrounded by bullet casings and frantic agents. She still smelled gunpowder every time she inhaled, though she knew it was just memory. He was in critical care now, and she had no idea if he would live long enough to finish exposing Carol's crimes. The possibility that a single bullet could wipe out so much evidence, so much truth, kept her heart hammering. If these attackers managed to find them again, what chance did she and her mother have? She pressed herself against the seat, scanning the darkness beyond her window. Moonlight touched the tips of dense pines. The sky felt unnervingly infinite. "Mom," she whispered, trying to pull her mother's attention away from her own dread. "If that place is well guarded, we'll be all right. Right?" Allison swallowed. "I hope so." Her voice was a pale shadow of its usual warmth. She squeezed Lexi's hand one more time, as if memorizing its feel. Then she turned to gaze ahead, silent resignation in her features. The SUV barreled on. After another 10 minutes, they arrived at a branching junction. The agent in the front seat muttered a code into the radio, receiving a crackled response. Suddenly, headlights flared in the distance behind them. Lexi tensed, heart pounding. But these lights appeared to belong to a truck that passed by on the crossroad, unremarkable in every way. Riley gripped the steering wheel, flipping on the high beams as he took a new, narrower road. "We're close," he said in a clipped tone. "Stay alert." The next stretch felt even darker, with the moon vanishing behind a dense canopy. Gravel gave way to rough asphalt, patches of potholes forcing a slower pace. Finally, they arrived at what looked like a high chain-link barrier, floodlights perched on tall poles. A sign at the gate read, "Federal Training Center, authorized personnel only." Two armed guards rushed out of a booth, guns at their sides, studying the SUV's credentials. Lexi's pulse steadied a fraction when the gates slid open and the car rolled forward into a wide lot illuminated by powerful overhead lights. Beyond lay a series of squat buildings, presumably dorms or offices for training programs. Agent Riley pulled up near a structure with narrow windows and a heavy metal door. 4 uniformed officers waited outside, scanning the vehicle's approach with unwavering focus. "End of the line for now," Riley said, cutting the engine. He opened his door, stepping out to confer with the uniformed officers. The second agent beckoned for Lexi and Allison to follow. Lexi gathered her backpack, her mother lugging the small suitcase containing personal mementos. Together, they exited into the harsh, artificial glow of the floodlights. The main building's interior was functional and impersonal, corridors painted off-white, floors a scuffed linoleum. But the staff moved decisively, directing Lexi and Allison to a more comfortable suite than the Spartan rooms they'd just left, with 2 beds, a small kitchenette, and a locked window that looked onto tall pines. An older man in a security uniform explained the layout of the compound. "You'll remain inside except when escorted by authorized personnel. Meals come to you. There's a phone if you need it, but every call gets monitored for your protection." Allison sank onto the bed with a shaky sigh. Lexi carefully placed the battered box of Daniel's documents on a table, next to a lamp. Even though each new safe house was said to be more secure, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were always one step behind the next threat. This entire day had been a swirling nightmare, and the night wasn't over. Sometime after they settled, Carla Price called. They used a secure line at a desk near the main corridor, where an armed guard stood watch. Lexi put the handset to her ear, hearing Carla's crisp voice. "I'm glad you made it safely. We're evaluating how best to continue. The hospital says Judge Marshall's in critical but stable condition. If he improves, we'll reassemble a plan to gather his testimony more discreetly." Lexi felt a knot in her chest ease, though only slightly. "Did you learn anything new about the attackers in the garage?" Carla's voice thinned with frustration. "Not yet. We suspect a leak. We're launching an internal review. For now, keep your heads down. And if you hear from Victor James, let me know. He was unreachable after you left the second safe house. I'm trying to confirm he's okay." Lexi's stomach twisted. She hadn't even thought about Victor in the chaos of the ambush. "He said he had personal matters, but he was going to join us. He never showed up." "I'll keep trying to reach him," Carla assured. "Given the danger, it's possible he went off the grid for safety. In the meantime, trust the agents around you. I'll be in touch." When Lexi relayed that conversation to Allison, her mother's face fell. Victor vanished too. "It's starting to feel like everyone who helps us goes missing or gets shot." Lexi swallowed the bitter taste of worry. "He's smart. Maybe he just turned off his phone for a while. Let's not assume the worst." They tried to rest, but every noise in the hallway set them on edge. At one point, a passing agent rattled keys outside their door, and Allison jumped so violently that she spilled water from the glass she was holding. Lexi rushed to help clean it, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. They were exhausted in body and soul. Sometime after midnight, as Allison dozed fitfully, Lexi crept to the window and peered out at the distant fence. Harsh floodlights lit the perimeter, and she could make out silhouettes of patrolling guards. This was as fortified as anywhere they'd been, but the memory of that brazen ambush didn't fade easily. She pressed her palm to the cool glass, thinking of her father. Was it over a similar fence that he once tried to escape men determined to silence him? Had they cornered him somewhere just as lonely and remote? She closed her eyes, imagining a different ending. Maybe he'd managed to slip away, forging a new life in hiding until it was safe to return. If that hope kept her going, she would cling to it. Tomorrow, the next day, whenever the dust settled, she'd demand every suspect talk, every lead be chased, until she knew for certain what became of him. Morning crept in slowly, a pale light seeping around the edges of the window. Outside, agents changed shifts with quiet efficiency. A brief knock on the door heralded a staffer bringing in a tray of scrambled eggs and toast. Lexi smelled instant coffee, strong and acrid. Allison pulled herself up from bed, hair mussed, eyes bloodshot. "What now?" her mother asked quietly, hands trembling around the coffee cup. Lexi forced a shrug. "We wait. We see if Carla calls with an update. If Marshall recovers, we do it all over again. If not..." She left the sentence hanging. After they ate, Agent Riley visited. He looked tired but tried to sound optimistic. "We have word from the hospital. He made it through the night without worsening. Doctors say the next 24 hours are crucial." He paused, scanning their faces. "We can try obtaining an emergency deposition if he's conscious enough. It wouldn't be perfect, but it might stand up in court if he can confirm your father's allegations on record." Allison clutched her elbows. "Would that be enough for Carla to move against Carol?" Riley tilted his head. "Possibly. She wants an ironclad case, but a judge's direct statement, even half lucid, might give us cause for high-level warrants. The biggest question is how swiftly we can act before Carol strikes again or flees." Lexi swallowed. "I hope the hospital is heavily guarded." Riley nodded firmly. "It is. We have plainclothes agents all over, but let's just say we're not taking chances. That means we'll keep you two here, locked down. No visitors until we're sure about the security." Time ground forward in a slow, tense routine. Occasional calls from Carla or another official updated them on Marshall's condition. No major changes. No sign of Victor. Agents dropped off meals and took away empty trays. Each hour, Allison seemed more withdrawn, eyes clouding over with a mix of sorrow and resolve. Late that afternoon, Lexi was flipping through Daniel's old notes for the 100th time, scanning for anything that might help corner Carol without Marshall's formal testimony. She saw references to some old warehouse near the docks, hush money drops, an informant named AC, who vanished after a last meeting with Daniel. Every line felt like a ghost story. She set down the pages, rubbing her temples. A sharp rap on the door broke her concentration. Agent Riley entered, breath hissing between his teeth. "We just got a coded message from Carla Price. She's about to move. Something new came to light, a big break. She wants you both ready." Lexi stood, heart hammering. "A big break?" Riley's gaze flicked to Allison, then back. "They located one of Carol's top enforcers. He's in custody and apparently willing to talk to get a deal. If he can confirm details about your father's disappearance or the judge's bribery, they might accelerate warrants against Carol, freeze his assets, everything." He cleared his throat. "Carla wants you prepped for a possible meeting tomorrow. She might have questions that only you can answer, relating to your father's timeline." The surge of hope almost made Lexi dizzy. Another enforcer flipping sides meant they might finally learn Daniel's fate. If this man had been around at the time, maybe he knew exactly what happened. Allison clasped Lexi's hand, eyes filling with cautious longing. Agent Riley lifted a shoulder. "We'll keep you informed. For now, it's a waiting game. Keep your phone by your side. If Carla calls, it means we have to move fast." Lexi barely slept that night, drifting in and out of restless dreams where her father's voice faded whenever she ran toward him. By dawn, she was wide awake, sitting on the edge of the stiff mattress, eyes gritty with exhaustion. She silently prayed that the flipped enforcer would reveal something useful, that Daniel Knight's story might finally have an ending, even if it came laced with pain. Outside, uniformed guards changed shift, footsteps echoing in the corridor. The building's overhead lights hummed, casting the same sterile glow that had surrounded them since arrival. Allison stirred on her own bed, blinking at Lexi through half-lowered lids. "Any word?" she asked, voice husky with fatigue. Lexi shook her head. Nothing yet. In the heavy hush, the only sound was the drone of the ventilation system. At least in their suite, they had the slight comfort of privacy. No locked cells or bars, though it felt like a cage all the same. Shortly after 7, Agent Riley arrived with a subdued nod. "Carla Price wants you in the main conference room. The enforcer has agreed to talk, and she believes you can confirm details about Daniel Knight's timeline. This is a closed session, no recordings. She's keeping it off the radar to avoid tipping off Carol's allies." Relief and dread swirled in Lexi's gut. She and her mother exchanged anxious glances, then rose to follow. They found the conference room at the end of a narrow hall. Carla stood by a long table, flipping through stacks of documents. She looked up, eyes troubled but determined. Beside her sat a man in plain clothes, late 30s, thick arms, a bruise on his cheek, as if freshly in custody. 2 agents, armed and watchful, flanked him. When Lexi and Allison stepped inside, the man regarded them through eyes that betrayed a swirl of regret and guarded hostility. Carla waved them toward empty chairs. "This is Trent Mackenzie," she said quietly. "He worked for Carol for nearly 6 years, overseeing security and other matters. He's in custody for multiple charges but wants a deal in exchange for cooperation. He says he knows something about Daniel Knight." Allison stiffened at the name, hands balled into fists on her lap. Lexi felt her pulse thrum in her ears, forcing herself to keep calm. Mackenzie cast a sideways glance at Lexi. "I remember you. You were a kid back then." His voice was hoarse, bearing a hint of shame. "Your dad was stubborn. We were told to get rid of him after he refused hush money. I oversaw the operation." Allison drew a sharp breath, knuckles blanching. Carla placed a steadying hand on her arm, signaling her to remain quiet so Mackenzie would continue. Lexi summoned her courage. "What did you do to him?" Mackenzie swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "We didn't kill him, if that's what you're asking. Carol said Knight needed to vanish but remain a cautionary tale. We took him to a remote place upstate, some old cabin we used for storing contraband. We made him sign a statement saying he was leaving town willingly. Then we beat him up enough that he couldn't fight. He nearly died that night, but we kept him breathing. Carol's plan was to keep him locked away until his story went cold." Allison's face crumpled, a muffled sob escaping. Lexi's fingernails dug into her palms, but she refused to look away. "Where is he now?" Mackenzie shifted under the agent's unyielding glares. "I don't know if he's still there. Last I heard, they moved him again after about a year. When I asked, they told me not to pry. But the rumor was he got sent out of state, maybe to some rundown property linked to another contact. We forced him to sign documents disclaiming his allegations. Carol wanted him alive just enough to spread fear among anyone who might consider following his lead. After a while, I stopped hearing about him altogether." Allison made a strangled sound, tears shining on her cheeks. Lexi's hands shook so hard she could barely speak. "So you're telling me my father was alive, but stashed somewhere like a prisoner?" Mackenzie exhaled. "Yes, I'm sorry." His eyes flitted around, landing on Carla. "Look, I'll give you names, addresses, everything. If Carol hasn't moved him again, maybe he's still there. But it's been years. I don't know the condition he'd be in." Carla's jaw tightened. "You'll provide all that now, in detail?" Mackenzie nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. One of the agents dropped a notepad in front of him, along with a pen. The enforcer leaned forward, scribbling an address that meant nothing to Lexi or Allison, then listing names of individuals who might know more. Carla studied each line, her expression grim. "We'll check these. If you're lying, the deal's off. If you're truthful, we'll see about reducing some charges. Understood?" He gave a bitter laugh. "I'm not in a position to lie." Carol left me for dead when I messed up a job last month. Got arrested, so I figure my best chance is telling the truth." The corridor lights buzzed overhead, a quiet soundtrack to the bleak revelations. Allison's chest heaved with silent sobs. Lexi swallowed a hot lump in her throat, hardly believing what she was hearing. Daniel might still be alive somewhere, hidden away for all these years. She felt a spark of fierce hope. She refused to let the heartbreak of his suffering overshadow the possibility of finding him. Carla glanced at the list, signaled to an agent, and then turned to Allison. "We'll dispatch a team to check these locations. It might take time. We can't promise he's still there, or even that he survived, but it's our first real lead on Daniel's whereabouts." Allison nodded, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she managed. Carla's gaze softened. "I'm sorry for everything you've endured. We'll do what we can." Agent Riley arrived moments later, stepping inside with urgency. "We've got a medical update on Judge Marshall. He's regained enough consciousness to give a partial statement. We can't haul him into court, so a federal magistrate is heading to the hospital to record his testimony." Carla exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. "Then we can combine it with Mackenzie's intel to open a full-scale operation." "Good. Let's do it." She turned to Allison and Lexi. "Once Marshall's statement is official, we'll launch immediate warrants. If any lead on Daniel emerges, we'll treat his rescue as top priority." Lexi squeezed her mother's shoulder, heart beating with desperate anticipation. For so long, she had assumed they'd only find a headstone or an unmarked grave. Now, the notion that he was alive, even if battered and scarred, lit a flame in her chest. She vowed to bring him home, no matter what. Over the next hours, Carla and her team scrambled to coordinate with agents across multiple states. Lexi and her mother hovered in the background, abiding by the instructions to stay put. They ended up back in their assigned rooms, pacing, jumping at every phone call. By evening, Carla assembled them in a different suite with a secure phone line on speaker. "Judge Marshall is still weak, but we got enough from him to confirm the bribery, the hush money, and Carol's direct involvement," Carla said. "With Mackenzie's location details, a strike team is heading out tonight. This includes searching the property upstate where Daniel Knight was once held. If we find nothing, we follow leads on the other addresses. We'll also seize Carol's bank accounts first thing tomorrow. He won't see it coming because we're acting all at once." Allison's eyes brimmed with tears she tried to hold back. "Thank you." Carla nodded. "We couldn't have done it without you." Early dawn found Lexi in a swirl of anxious readiness, half convinced the call about a rescue or a grim discovery would come at any second. She dozed in a chair, lulled by exhaustion. Then an agent burst into the room, face bright with excitement. "We got him," he said breathlessly. "They found your father." Allison jerked upright, nearly toppling the small table. Lexi stumbled to her feet, heart hammering. "Alive?" she choked out. The agent nodded. "Yes, barely conscious but alive. He was guarded in a dilapidated farm structure matching Mackenzie's lead. They arrested 2 men on site. Your father was malnourished, beaten, but they stabilized him. He's being airlifted to a secure medical center." Allison let out a sob of sheer relief, pressing both hands to her mouth. Lexi felt a swell of dizzying joy and terror combined. After years of believing he was lost forever, they had him back. She latched onto her mother, tears burning her cheeks. "He's alive," she whispered, hardly daring to believe. "We did it. Mom, we did it." Within the hour, Carla confirmed it via phone. Daniel Knight had indeed been discovered. He'd apparently been moved multiple times, but the squad arrived before his captors could relocate him again. Carol's entire operation was collapsing. Indictments rained down on the corrupt circle. Officials, enforcers, business cronies. The long-buried truth had at last emerged. A day later, Lexi and Allison were flown under guard to the hospital where Daniel was being treated. Medical staff bustled in white corridors smelling of antiseptic. Lexi's legs shook as she approached the guarded ICU door. Allison gripped her hand, tears in both their eyes. Inside the room, Daniel lay propped up on pillows, face gaunt, bandages visible through the gaps in his hospital gown. But despite the ravages of captivity, his eyes lit with wonder when he saw them. "Lex," he rasped, voice cracking from disuse. "Allison." Allison fell to her knees by the bed, sobbing, pressing her forehead to his hand. Lexi blinked hard, fighting her own tears, leaning in to grasp his free hand. His skin felt thin, but his grip twitched with a whisper of the old strength she remembered. It was the moment she had dreamed of all these years, a reunion shaped by heartbreak and unyielding love. Daniel's gaze flicked between them, searching their faces. "They told me you were safe," he managed. "They said if I fought, they'd hurt you." Allison gently hushed him. "We're here. It's over. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Lexi pressed her trembling lips together, voice catching. "We're going to get you strong again, Dad. Carol's going to prison and everyone who helped him will pay." Daniel's eyes watered. He mouthed a silent thank you, perhaps for refusing to let his story end in darkness. In the corridor, federal agents stood aside respectfully, aware they were witnessing the final triumph of a family battered but not broken. News had already spread of Carol's arrest, of Judge Marshall's partial recovery, of the sweeping crackdown on the entire network. Reporters would soon cover every angle. Yet for Lexi, the only angle that mattered right now was the sight of her father's eyes, alive and bright with relief. She sank onto the edge of the bed, resting her head on his arm. Allison stroked Daniel's hair, tears streaming in silent testament to years of uncertainty turned into this fragile victory. None of them spoke of the scars he carried, the damage done. They had time to heal, time to piece together lost years, time to stand together against whatever might come next. In that quiet ICU ward, the hum of monitors blended with the faint beep of Daniel's heartbeat, each beep a promise that love could endure the worst nightmares. They stayed like that, mother and daughter holding on to the man they had refused to forget, letting their tears speak the words their voices could not. Outside, the machinery of justice continued to grind, unstoppable now that truth had been unleashed. Agents would finalize statements, prosecutors would prepare indictments, corrupt officials would face reckoning, and the Knight family's courage would become the spark that had lit the fuse. But within that hospital room, all that mattered was a father returned, a daughter's faith rewarded, and a mother's grief turned to hope at last.